it's here about Welbeck Hill. So I'm Rose Nicholson, I'm the Heritage Manager, so I'm new to this talk. We've got this series of talks linked to the Bones and Burials exhibition. So this is the third or fourth one that we've done, and all of them link back to the exhibition, whether it's about the skeletons that are on display or whether it's about one of the cemeteries. So some of the small finds that are in the exhibition are from Welbeck Hill, which is why I'm going to be talking about it today. There is just a little bit of housekeeping. There is no fire tests planned, so if the fire alarms do go off, we will need to vacate the building. We have 3 members of staff here today, so myself and my 2 colleagues here. So if we do need to leave, we will make sure that you all are safe. We won't run out. Yeah. Try and pull over everyone to get out in our case. So there is a fire exit here, which for some reason has a dustbin in front of it. And then if for any reason there is a fire in front of that one, we would vacate through the door at the back and go up the stairs. So that's the housekeeping done. So without any further ado, I'll get on and do the talk. So I'm going to talk about Welbeck Hill, which was excavated by the late Gordon Taylor, who was an amateur archaeologist, and he excavated the site between 1962 and 1979. So there were 17 seasons of digging during winter when there was no crops in the field. 72 inhumations were found and 5 cremations, so it was a fairly large cemetery. And the associated grave goods dated the cemetery to the early Anglo-Saxon period, so a period of around AD 425 to about 650. Now, Gordon Taylor, he was an amateur archaeologist, he was self-taught, and the excavation of the site was his life's work, it was his life's passion. And he really wanted to publish, but as is often the case with excavations like this, which are self-funded and self-driven, he didn't actually manage to get the site published before he died. So today we're going to have a little look at how the site, what Gordon Taylor found. We'll have a look at some of the grave goods, how it came to be in the museum, and what we're going to do with it now. It is in the museum. So that's Gordon Taylor. So in 1962, there was ploughing on some agricultural land, and it disturbed a number of burials. So bits of pot and some human bone were coming to the surface. So Welbeck is in Humber, and the disturbed burials attracted his attention. He used to do field walking, so he spotted the finds on the surface and recognised that there was something interesting, and went to speak to the landowner, who agreed that he would allow an excavation of the site. So he led these excavations. Like as I said, he was self-taught, but he didn't do it. He wasn't the only one digging on site. He did have help. He worked with the archaeologists from the museum here, the Scunthorpe Museum. So it was Chris Knowles, I believe, at the time, who was the curator, and so he went out and did help them with the excavation. And lots of people came and volunteered as well. It was a community project. It was a volunteer-led project. And some of those volunteers went on to have careers in archaeology as well, so it kind of inspired a lot of people to the site. Mr. Taylor did go on to study archaeology, and he became a history teacher. So it was a life-changing event, was the discovery of the Welbeck Hill Cemetery. His children grew up digging on the site. They spent their winters out on the site with him. And it's a real family. It's a real family project and an important archive for the family. So the resulting archive was kept together by Mr. Taylor, and as I said, he did write up the site for his dissertation. But unfortunately, it never really went any further than that. The researchers did have access to the site, so some of the material was looked at by specialists, and the specialist reports were pulled together by Mr. Taylor, and he kept really meticulous records. I've got them here, or some of it here that I can show you, and it's what I've used to put the talk together. He drew the finds, he drew the graves, he drew site plans. He recorded where everything came from, so we've got really excellent records, and it's everything. Everything's there to be able to publish. It just needs pulling together. So apart from some tantalising glimpses, the site's been kind of hidden since the 1960s. There was this flurry of activity when it was excavated, and various people looked at pieces, but it's kind of been been hidden. Some of the objects did come here for an exhibition called The Lost Kingdom, which Dr. Kevin Lee did a long time ago. I think it was in the 80s. So some of the objects have been on display then. But until they came here, and the handful that are on display in the bones and burials, they haven't been on public view before. So that's you know, quite exciting to happen. So. We'll go to that one now. So after Mr. Taylor died, he died in 2017. His wife and children wanted to honour his wishes and see the collection, the archive, actually go to a museum. They decided to have an auction house, get an auction house involved in that negotiation. Unfortunately, as it turned out, because it made it all much more difficult. But this was all happening 2019, 2020, which obviously we're all in. It's a very difficult time to be doing any kind of acquisition, but it was particularly difficult. So we did hear about the sale. So if you know anything about museums and museum collecting areas, there's not going to be that many museums that would want to acquire the material, because we collect, local authority museums, we collect our collecting areas. So a museum down south isn't going to be interested. Someone in Scotland's not going to be interested. The only museums that are going to be interested are the ones whose patch it's on. So it falls within our collecting area, and we're particularly interested in collecting Anglo-Saxon material that tells the story of the Kingdom of Lindsey. So we expressed our interest and said, you know, can we work with you to acquire it and it not actually be auctioned, which was quite a difficult conversation, because once it had gone to the auctioneers, they obviously really wanted to push for it to be sold. But we did eventually come to an agreement, and we were able to acquire the archive. Now, unfortunately, the auctioneers, obviously they were trying to make as much money. Their job is to get as much money for something that's going up for sale as they can. And so they did a lot of promotion and did a lot of stuff on social media and with the press. And some of it didn't come off very well, particularly with the archaeological community, because of some of the language that was used and the way that some of the material was presented. For example, the skull that you can see in the middle, this was shared by the auction house on social media as a man, and said, look at this man that was found in a wardrobe in North Lincolnshire, which of course it wasn't found in a wardrobe in North Lincolnshire. Mr. Taylor had excavated it and had been looking after it, and it was it's a woman as well. So you know, it upset the archaeological community. I was getting all kinds of emails from people. Do I know? Have you seen what's going on? Do you know anything about this? All the while, I'm quietly talking to the family and the auctioneers behind the scenes, and it obviously upset. Some of the coverage really upset the family as well, which is obviously not ideal either, because they were, you know, we wanted the archive in the museum, they wanted the archive in the museum. It was the auctioneers who wanted the promo and to make money. So yes, it was tricky. It's not the usual way of going around acquiring excavation archives. Usually the archive would be it would just come to the museum. We wouldn't normally be negotiating to buy an archaeological archive. The majority of the material that's recovered from excavations is not worth any, you know, it has no monetary value. It's the historical value that's important. Things like potsherds and, you know, like fragments of animal bone are not going to make millions on the market, but individual finds within the archive could have if sold individually, because people do collect that kind of material. But we obviously wanted to keep it together so that we could publish it, and that was all family wanted as well. So we did get there. Also, the other thing that caused a bit of controversy as well, particularly within the archaeological community and some bloggers was the inclusion of human remains in the archive. Now, though there were 72 inhumations, not all of the human remains were recovered. Quite a lot were recorded and then reburied on site. But some skeletons were kept and they came with the archive. Now, as a museum and as an accredited museum, we sign up to the Museum Association's ethical standards. So we don't own human remains. We would never buy human remains. Our human remain policy states that we are the custodians of those human remains in our collection. They are not acquired or accessioned like other material in the collection. So when we were discussing acquiring this archive, all we could really talk about was acquiring the small finds and the paper archives that go with it. But the human remains would of necessity have to stay. It was like a condition that we put on it that we would only acquire if everything came, but we were not paying a penny for the human remains. And that the auction house did actually have to start telling people that, because that was the particular thing that was really upsetting people. Because there is no law against buying or selling human remains. Ethically, it should be, but so we I went with Kevin Leahy. Kevin was familiar with the archive, and he came with me, and we went and had a look at the material in the auction house. And we put together a bid for acquiring the material. It was more than we could have bought, we could have done with museums core funding, anything like that. We would have had to go to funders, and it actually ended up we had to go to 3 different funders in order to get the full amount, which we're very grateful for. But again, all 3 of them, they were very clear that they were only giving us funding for the small finds. There was no funding at all. If we said we were buying the human remains, they would have been like, see you later. So with the Museum Association Beecroft request, the Headley Trust, which is the Sainsbury's Foundation funder that supports archaeological acquisitions, and the V&A Purchase Grant Fund as well. So they were the 3 funders that helped us acquire the archive. So the site. So this is the site of Welbeck Hill. So during the early Anglo-Saxon period, the main event is that the Romans leave and Anglo-Saxon migrants, successive waves of migrants arrive. They come across the North Sea from their Germanic homelands, and they settle in the east and southern areas of England. So the main evidence we have for these Anglo-Saxon migrants is their cemeteries. And there are a lot of these cemeteries, and a lot have been excavated in northern Lincolnshire. They're highly visible, and they're very they look intrusive because they do not appear to be a development from what we have in the late Roman period. They look very different archaeologically. So during the late Roman period, the usual practice was for a body to be buried on its back in a west-east orientation with no grave goods. But what we have with the Anglo-Saxons are people being buried with lots of grave goods, and the grave goods look different to what came before. And where they're paralleled is with the Germanic homeland. So that's the evidence for them being migrants. We kind of think of that as being large-scale migration, but what we might actually have is migration with people who live here then adopting the new style of clothing and the new lifestyle. It's not to say that everyone who lived in northern Lincolnshire up sticks and left as soon as the Anglo-Saxons arrived. There would have been an element of intermixing. So not all occupants of Anglo-Saxon graves in the early Anglo-Saxon period are necessarily Germanic. Some of them are probably British. It's just that they're wearing Germanic style clothing. Now, there's been lots of developments in scientific studies since the 1960s, and there's a lot of work being done with isotopes and DNA and looking at where people actually came from or where they grew up. Now, unfortunately, we can't do that with the Welbeck Hill material because we haven't got the skeletons, or the ones that we've got. Unfortunately, they haven't been marked with the grave number, and the packaging material doesn't tell us which grave it's in. So it's the ones that we've got, it's actually at the moment very difficult to match them to a specific grave, which is unfortunate, but it's not the only site that's happened to. So it is what it is. So northern Lincolnshire was a focus of early Anglo-Saxon settlement in the migration period. The River Humber, if you're sailing across the North Sea, the River Humber is a great big, that estuary is a big welcoming mouth, isn't it, for anyone coming? So they sailed in, landed at various places, and so you get early Anglo-Saxon settlement on the north and south bank, and some of the early cemeteries are in those two areas, so in the East Riding and also in northern Lincolnshire as well. So we've got definite evidence from the early 5th century in the form of the cemeteries with early graves, but there's some evidence as well for late Roman. Germanic people being here in the late Roman period as well. We've got some objects on display in the early Saxon case through the archaeology gallery that date to the very, late Roman, very early Anglo-Saxon period, like the Tutulus brooch from Kermington. So cemeteries of various sizes have been found scattered throughout northern Lincolnshire. The Welbeck Hill cemetery is situated on the east edge of the Lincolnshire Wolds. It overlooks Barton Street, so that's the yellow line running down this map here, which is the ancient trackway which runs north from Louth up to the Humber, which probably dates back to at least the Neolithic. Barton Street lies between the hill, so Welbeck Hill, where the cemetery is, and Welbeck Spring, which is the ancient or the old source of the River Freshney. And it's only a couple of miles from a couple of other inhumation cemeteries that are known as well. So there's one at Ryby, which is number 1 on the map, and another one at Laceby as well. So Welbeck was predominantly an inhumation cemetery, so that's burials rather than cremations. It's with 72 inhumations and just a handful of 5 cremations found. Now in Eastern England, it's usual or the more predominant to have cremation cemeteries, but there is this scatter of inhumation cemeteries in North Lincolnshire. So as you can see from the map, all those little dots, apart from 9 and 10, are the inhumation cemeteries, and they're fairly spread out, and they're usually small and spread out and near the settlements that they served. And the reason for that is probably, it's the obvious one, in that it's not so easy to carry a dead body a long way. Whereas cremation cemeteries tend to be in centralised locations, and they would have served a number of different communities, and they tend to be much bigger. So they're like Elsham and Cleetham, which I've just put on there for comparison, so you can see that they're more central, whereas these are sort of scattered where people were living. So sorry, this is I have got a copy of this here just to show you how difficult it was to create this image. This is the site plan that Mr. Taylor created, but I think you can just sort of vaguely see the little lines where the bodies are on there. So the cemetery then dates from mid-5th about to 6th, possibly early 7th century. There appear to be sort of 3 areas of focus. So we can see, this is north, so you can see that quite the bodies along the ridge, so in the line across the centre, they're all north-south. Now, quite a lot of those have lots of grave goods with them. They're the ones with where the women have got lots of grave goods. And then we have a group at the top of this drawing that are east-west, and most of them don't have many finds with them at all. And then just off this map, that's where the cremations were. So we've got 3 kind of groups there. Now, what we could be seeing here, and this is something we didn't need to do. I need to do a bit more work on this and actually mapping it out and looking at the grave goods and working out which of these spots is which grave and things like that. A bit more closely. But what we could be seeing is a couple of different phases. So when the Anglo-Saxons arrive, they are wearing the clothing from their homeland. So they're wearing their traditional homeland costume. By the end of the early Anglo-Saxon, we start to see more of an English or a national costume arriving. So those differences that relate to the homeland start to break down a bit. So in the beginning, all the ladies would have been wearing their tunics, their under tunics, the pairs of brooches, strings of beads, cloak over top, big brooch, belt, things hanging off it. So when they're buried in their clothing, they're accompanied by lots of grave goods. By the end, so by the time you get into the 7th century, the jewellery's changed. People are starting to move towards pins, so you haven't got the range of grave goods. So people are being buried with hardly any facts. But we also start to see social stratification as well, which we don't see so much in the early Anglo-Saxon. Everyone's kind of the same. So by the end of the early Anglo-Saxon, we're starting to see some rich people and everyone else who not very much. And that also relates to the conversion period in the 7th century. We have the conversion to Christianity. And that's when we see the switch to east-west burials. So what we could have here is 2 phases of the cemetery, with the east-west burials representing a final phase of the early Anglo-Saxon, after which the cemetery goes out of use. So just a couple of pictures there to show you how the burials look. So we get inhumations that are crouched or laid out on the back as well, and most of the east-west ones are laid out on their backs, which again is something that we see in the final phase. We see that switch to east-west being laid out on the back. So this is how the grave goods looked at the auction house when I went down with Kevin. So this is just to give you an idea of the kind of material that we were presented with, and the range. As much as it's about half of what you can see on those pictures, there's much more. The auction house had, unfortunately, they took all the lids off the boxes and kept them all separate. So but because Mr. Taylor's records are so good, we can work out where the labels have come off. We can work out which object is which for the most part. As you can see, you know, those crystal brooches. They should all have little tags. They should all have Mr. Taylor's little tags on them. So there's a bit of work to do in piecing everything back together. So the types of material that we've got are the grave goods. We can see brooches, there's the pendants, there's the only 2 girdle hangers from the site there, lots of ironwork, some spears, a whole range of materials. So we've got men and women represented. And what we're going to do now is we'll have just a whiz through. We'll look at some of the things that were found and some of the graves. So this is my favourite grave, because it's got my favourite objects in it. So this is grave 41, who was an adult female. And this also gives you, this is the kind of record that Mr. Taylor kept. So we've got these lovely little drawings of the skeletons showing exactly where the finds were found in relation to the body in the grave, which direction it was. I mean, this is the bottom of a sheet that has all the information from the excavation, so we can pinpoint exactly where each of the skellies were, and each of the graves were, and where they faced. So it's excellent. So here we have one of the richest burials from the site. This was a high status female, dating to the mid 6th century. So she wore a pair of annular brooches. You can see the round circles here. There's the annular brooches that she's wearing that were fastened in her clothing. She's got a length of beads between the necklet and the brooches. She's got a big brooch here, which probably fastened her cloak. She's wearing snake finger rings, so she's got quite a bit of doing on there, really. And this brooch here is probably the most important brooch from the site. This is on display in the display case. This is a great square-headed brooch. So it's copper alloy that's been gilded. So this is a brooch type that originated in Scandinavia, so from the homelands, and it was introduced by the Anglo-Saxon migrants. It's the most complex of, this type of brooch is the most complex of the early Anglo-Saxon brooches. And there were status markers worn by high status women, and it would have been, as I said, used to fasten the cloak. It's in excellent condition. It's almost like it was new when it went in the grave. It's it's in really, really excellent condition. It's a beautiful thing. They're not common finds. Most women would have been wearing annular or cruciform brooches, so it really is, these are high status objects. Not many people got these. There's a fragment of a footplate of another great square-headed brooch from the site as well, but and I think we've got one other one in the collection, so whereas we've got hundreds of cruciforms, that gives you an idea of the number of people that would have been wearing them. She was also wearing 2 snake rings. So top left there, we've got a silver snake ring. So they look like a snake basically, wrapped around your finger, which they're quite nice as well. And she also has this little scutiform pendant here, which, or bracteate scutiform pendant. I'm not sure if it's a shield rock, that one, or a bracteate, but we'll come back to them shortly because we're going to have a look at some other bracteate pendants ones. So the usual of the big brooches are the cruciforms. So this is grade 3 adult female sheep cruciform brooch. Now cruciform brooches and annular brooches as well, they're more common. They're the ones that people are usually wearing in Eastern England, the ladies are normally wearing. And annular brooches are the most common on the site, and then it's the cruciforms, and there's a handful of small long, and then it's the great square-headed. So that's the kind of brooch that we've got. But this is a typical combination, really. Pair of annulars to fasten the tunic and the undergarment with a cruciform for the cloak. So cruciforms are one of the most distinctive of the early Anglo-Saxon brooches. So they're shaped like a cross, which is why we call them cruciform. That's an archaeological term that's been applied to them. And they have horses' heads on the bottom. So if you look at the footplate here, this is a horse's head. You can see the 2 eyes and the flaring nostrils. Now cruciforms do evolve over the early Anglo-Saxon period, and the very earliest ones, the horse does look like a horse, but they become more decorative, and the nostrils become more flary, and they become a bit more stylized. But this is quite an early one because it does look like a horse. I hope everyone agrees.
When you said it, the first I was like.
Now horses were important to the Scandinavian religion. So there's it's possible that this relates to a horse cult. You can think about Odin and Sleipnir as an example. The Fanvir, the horses are important to the Germanic tradition, Germanic religion. So perhaps these relate to a specific horse cult or just horses in general. And the other thing to remember is that we always display them in museums that way up, but actually the head plate's heavy, so they would give them all the other way up. So when the lady's wearing it, the horse would be the right way up for them when they look down. It's a bit like nurses with their watches, which makes it even more interesting. They're wearing them for themselves. It's not necessarily for other people. And then also here we have another little scutiform pendant. So again, we'll come back to scutiform pendants. And the annular brooches. Another find of note from this one is this jutish buckle. So this is a copper alloy buckle. It's called I always get this wrong. It's called a shield on tongue buckle because of this decorative piece here on the buckle. And another one was found on site as well, but they're not terribly common really. So it's quite nice to have that. And they do relate to the Frankish homeland, so it's not the Angles or the Saxons, it's the Frankish homeland. So that's a link from a different part of the Anglo-Saxon homelands. So I was just talking about how cruciforms develop. So this is one of the latest ones on the site from the series. This is a florid cruciform. So you can see what were quite simple knobs on the head plate. So the 3 projections on the head plate at the top, they start off quite simple. They become more ornate. We have an example on display where those have become so ornate it's almost become a great square-headed brooch because they're kind of joined up. And what we have on this one, which probably you can see more clearly in the drawing, is that they the nostrils and the lugs on the sides and the knobs on the head plate, they're actually little biting serpents. You see the little heads coming round with the eye. And you've got a mouth. It's quite nice, isn't it? So yes, they do evolve, they change, and the style changes over time. So yeah, not much to say about annular brooches. They're quite simple, really. They're circular, usually worn in pairs, usually quite often a match pair as well. Decorated with ring and dot of incised lines or angled lines. This one in the middle has got little bosses on it as well. So, but they are the most common brooch on the site. Most of them are copper alloy, but you can see here we've got an iron one in that box there. But that's it. But yeah, angular brooches. We also have a couple of other brooches that just appear singly. So on the left, we have a gilded saucer brooch. So it's copper alloy with gilding with swirly decoration. And saucer brooches were preferred in the south of England over cruciform. So again, that's quite interesting that we've got a link to a different area of the homeland. So its appearance, it's not the only one. There are other ones known, but it's a rare occurrence to have a saucer brooch. And we also have this open swastika or sun brooch with stamped ring and dot decoration. Our swastika symbols or sun symbols are actually related to the god Thor, because he wasn't just the god of thunder and lightning, he was also the bringer of sunshine. So they possibly represents that that link to Thor. It could be they're a follower of Thor. So the as we've seen already with the early necklace, Anglo-Saxon women wore strings of beads either as necklaces or between the pins of the brooches across their chests. And there's loads of beautiful beads from Welbeck. There's some really glorious strings. So this one is interesting because it has this little hanging. And this is a piece of wood that's coiled and then encased in a silver cross. So Mr. Taylor did send off the wood for analysis. They weren't able to determine what kind of wood this was, but it could be oak. So oak was believed to have healing properties, and it's also a sacred tree for the Anglo-Saxons. And then, but it could be that it's a little amulet here. It's not just a pendant. It's got some amuletic, magical kind of properties, and perhaps it links to the way it could link to a specific cult as well. And we also have in grave 18B, she was wearing two of these lovely little silver rings with coiled bezels as well, which are quite nice. Again, we don't get loads of rings, loads of finger rings from Anglo-Saxon graves, so it's always nice to see something like that. So just some of the other necklaces. Majority of the beads are amber, made from amber from the Baltic. But we do get these other beads, so that there's blue and green glass beads, there's polychrome beads, there's some rock crystal ones, there's the odd one that's made of metal. So there is, there's a range of different bead types. The general style seems to, or the preferred style on the site seems to have lots of beads about the same size, and then have one big polychrome one in the middle at the front. But not all of them are like that. And Mr. Taylor also recognised a tailing off in the size of the beads as well. The necklaces that are slightly later tend to have smaller beads. Whether that means something about the trade or the size of the lumps that they're getting to work with, but they are lovely. They're lovely amber beads. The problem with amber is because it's a natural tree resin, it does degrade. So not all the beads are the lovely red glossy colour that they should be. They start to get this sort of crazy on the surface because with it being an organic substance, it does get affected by the chemicals that's in its own composition. To be honest, that's what's doing it. But yeah, they're beautiful. There is some of the beads out on display, but we do like the beads. Okay. So the pendants, so these are from 2 graves. We have 3 graves. So we've got Scutiform pendants from grave 56, which is the 2 on the one on the right and the one on the bottom, which are like a matched pair. And Scutiform pendants, where they're not unknown. Not everyone has Scutiform pendants, but you often get a handful on site. So there's 5 or 6, I think, from Cleetham Cemetary, for example. So we've got a few in the collection, and there's some of them on display, and I think there's a couple from Welbeck as well. But they're really cute. They're basically Scutiform in shield shape, so they're little miniature Anglo-Saxon shields. And sometimes you even get a little hand, the handle on the back, even though it's a pendant, so you get the little handle that represented on the back. So what you've got here is a little shield with the boss in the middle. These again were thought to be amuletic, so to have magical protective properties. Perhaps they're worn as little protective amulets for the wearer, so they're protecting them from evil, protecting them from bad things happening. And Mr. Taylor, when he was writing his dissertation, he was his particular angle was looking at the links to ritual or religion from the Anglo-Saxons homelands, and he suggested that they could be the symbol of Ulf, who's a Norse Germanic sky god, and his symbol was the shield. So perhaps like followers of Thor may have worn the Thor's hammer, followers of Ulf wore a miniature shield. We don't know. We can only surmise from things like that, but I think it's quite a nice idea, that. So other types of pendant that we have are the silver bracteates as well. Again, not masses and masses of these around. We had 3 in the collection before we acquired Welbeck Hill. So there's 3 in that archive, so it doubled our holdings just acquiring the excavation. So bracteates are, again, there's something they're introduced from the homelands during the migrations. They're round pendants, often made of gold foil, but the ones we have here are silver. They have a central image, usually animals or people. They're high status female jewellery again, so they're not often found in high status ways on necklace chains with other bits of pendant and jewellery. And they may have had amuletic abilities linked to the imagery that's on them. Perhaps the images are linked to pagan beliefs. Sometimes it's hard to work out what they are, but often they're like beasts being defeated, which is the triumph of good over evil, and all kinds of things like that. Sometimes they have runic inscriptions, and sometimes they look like the copying coins as well, Roman coins. So let's get this one the right way around. So this one from grave 14, it's not very clear, but there's a little symbol here. You can see the animal, looks a bit like a monkey, doesn't it? We've got an animal, and then we've got a symbol here, which looks like it could be a rune. And it was sent off to a specialist who thinks it might be law, which might be trying to say lahu, which is a magical word which is commonly found on bracteates, which is thought to be invitation or summons, and may refer to offering or initiation to a religious group, something like that. So it's some kind of, sounds very wishy-washy, that, doesn't it? But it's it's some kind of magical word anyway, which is quite nice. And then on this other one, the one from 52, we have a beast. Like here we've got the head, so it's a bitey beast in a circle. So just to finish off the different kinds of dress accessories that we find, there's lots of sleeve clasps from the site as well. So Anglo-Saxon women, they wore long sleeves, and they wore them. They were fastened at the cuffs by sleeve clasps, so they're quite common finds. Occasionally, you find them at wrists, at ankles, as well. They're being fastened to pair of trousers as well at the ankle, but usually you find them on sleeves. Most of the ones that we get are these plate style. So you have a hook on one side and a little hole to hook it into. I can't remember what you'd call it, clasp of some kind. So they hook into each other and it's just to fasten. But we also get these ones which are again are early. We've got examples from Welbeck that are on display in the archaeology gallery. This swirly type, which are quite nice. So there were 3 sets of these swirly types found in 3 female graves, all of a similar date, and they all had necklaces that had beads with a faint swirly design on it. Mr. Taylor in his dissertation posited that perhaps these were 3 early migrants that came over together. Perhaps they were related, or they came, but they came over wearing similar dress accessories for whatever reason, which is a nice idea. But unfortunately, because we don't have the skellies, it's not something that we can check scientifically, because that would be a nice thing to be able to test if we'd, if we could do isotopes or something to see if they all grew up in the same area. We can't do that, but yes, they're sleeve clasps. Now, common in male and female graves are buckles and knives, and these are usually made of iron. We've seen that you do get the occasional copper alloy buckle. Now, most people would have been wearing a belt. Women had purses and things hanging off them, girdle hangers and keys and various things. And men would have had their knives. Women had knives as well, because everyone needed a knife, because everyone needs to eat, and your knife is for chopping your food up and eating with it. So you do get knives in most graves, and you do get them still when you go into the final phase burials, where you don't get so much of the dress accessories. People are still being buried with buckles and knives because they're still wearing belts and eating, basically. So men, we've talked a lot about the kind of female graves because they're the ones that have most of the grave goods. But we do get some nice finds from the male graves as well. So when male burials have grave goods, they tend to be weapons or weapon related. So it's usually a spear, sometimes a shield, and very rarely a sword. And that's because, swords are high status, expensive, and spears are what everyone had, all warriors had them. So 6 burials at Welbeck had spears, and grave 12 is the one that we're looking at here, because this is particularly interesting. This is an interesting grave, this one. So 12A, it's called 12A because there are actually 2 burials in grave 12, 12A and 12B. And if you look at the photograph of the skeleton, you can see that there is a skeleton lying top to bottom in that image. You can see the skull at the top and the legs, and he's kind of laid like that with his head propped up on a pillow at the side of the grave, and his feet are on top of another body. You can see the leg bones underneath the other leg bones, and that body didn't have a head, it'd been decapitated. So we've got a double burial. The person on the top had grave goods, the one underneath didn't. Now, it could be, decapitated bodies aren't, it has to be said, they aren't uncommon in Anglo-Saxon graves. There's one, if anyone came to Kevin's talk, he talked about the decapitated body at Cleetham. They're also not uncommon in Roman burials as well. So it's not an uncommon practice. In Scandinavia, it's not uncommon as well, and it's thought that it may have been a punishment against a criminal in some cases. Other suggestions are that the decapitation was to stop people rising after their death and coming back and wreaking vengeance on whoever had wronged them during their life. Well, if you'd been decapitated to be buried with someone, I think you'd have a good reason to come back, wouldn't you? But it could also be that it's a servant or a slave that's been sacrificed or killed to accompany the master into death as well. We'll never know, but you can make up lots of different ideas about what decapitation could mean. It might not have even been a bad thing. It could just have been part of the practice for some people that did decapitation of bodies. But what we could have is here we have a master with his slave. So we've got a warrior and the slave's been decapitated to accompany him, to serve him in his afterlife. He was accompanied, the warrior was accompanied by a spear. He had a knife at his wrist, and he also had a wooden drinking cup at his, next to his head. So you could say that he had everything he needed for his afterlife. He had his cup for drinking, he had his knife for eating, and he had his spear for fighting, and he had his slave to serve towards the east. So any warrior going to Valhalla, that was all they really needed. So it's a nice story anyway. But the spear is particularly interesting. It's a big one. It's bigger than all the other ones that are found on site. It's got a really wide blade, but it also has, can you see it on the top edge of it, there's what looks like a little hole or a little nick in the blade. Well, that's actually there was a hole there and it had a ring in it. And there's something similar on the other side. You can't really see it on the drawing, but on the bottom edge, the ring is still in the hole. Now this is really unusual. When this was found, as far as I know, it was the only one it's the only spear that had ever been found with rings in the blade. I don't know if any have been found since, but that's something that obviously we need to research. But it's not, it's not clear why it would have had rings in it. And one suggestion is that it's perhaps had a pennant or pendant hanging from it as a sign of status. So you sort of hold up your shield and it shows you sort of the top warrior or whatever, because you don't need them. It's unusual, to say the least, to have had these rings in the spear. But it was X-rayed. It's not made up. They are actually there. They did X-ray it, and it's clearly a little ring. So yeah, we don't have any swords from Welbeck, but what we do have is 2 burials that had shields. Now shields don't survive terribly well because they're made of wood, animal skins, but their fittings are generally iron, perhaps with gold or silver mounts. And iron doesn't survive terribly well, but we do have 2 shield bosses. And grave 17 also had the handle as well, so that would have been on the inside of the shield, and mounts as well that would have been on the shield. These are circular mounts that would have been on the wood, whether on the edge or near the boss. And this one from grave 63 actually has gilding just on the very tip of the boss as well, which again, it parallels with the one that we have from Sawcliffe, which is on display in the archaeology gallery, that actually has a really decorative boss. It has it's copper alloy gilded, and it has it's been inset with garnets as well, which is a bit of bling for battlefield, really, isn't it? Taking something like that out into the battlefield, but it's not quite as elaborate here. There. That was kind of a quick whiz through. So what's next? There's obviously we know quite a lot because of all the work that Mr. Taylor did. But as you've seen, some of the materials not really in the best kind of packaging. We need to get it all into conservation grade packaging so it stabilises and doesn't degrade anymore. I'm going to check everything off and make sure it is the object that we think it is. Give it its right grave number. Group them by grave number. We've done some photography. There's more photography to be done, so we've got a whole catalogue. We need to do a conservation assessment. That needs money, not cheap. So I need to get everything assessed and then pay for that, and then pay for conservation as well, which will probably have to happen in phases. So I'm looking for funding for that at the moment. And we'll get everything catalogued so it's on the database and the researchers can easily access it. We're going to get all the specialist reports reviewed and updated, and then create a proper publication, which will be free. It's going to go on ADS, the database and the publication catalogue, so that people can access the material and research it further and tell us more about what's there. And then we want to also do some exhibitions. We want to just tell everyone about this really, really interesting cemetery, and material be added to the archaeology gallery as well. And we're also looking at doing a temporary exhibition here at some point once we've done all the bits before it, and then that will tour It'll be a mini tour. It'll go to Grimsby to the Fish and Heritage Centre as well. So that's kind of our plans. So there's a lot to do. And a lot of that will happen alongside each other. We're kind of at the beginning, now we've got it, we're at the beginning of the journey of sorting out really, and seeing Mr. Taylor's legacy honoured, getting the material that he worked on all his life published. So that's got a few minutes for questions, 10 minutes or so for questions, if anyone wants to ask me anything.
A couple, one early one, but if the family wanted to go to the museum and the museum wanted it, how did the auction house get involved in it?
The family decided to use an auction house to broker the deal. So that's why it went that way, yeah. Yeah.
And the other one is plans to do any further excavations on the site?
I haven't got any plans. I don't even know. I haven't been there, to be honest, to see what it looks like now. I don't even, I presume it's still farmland, but I'm not 100% sure. I think it still is. But I imagine there might be, because they've already excavated it. There isn't really a very good record of where on the site the bones were put back, because that would be something interesting to get if we could recover the rest of the skeletons. But yeah. At the moment, no. Yeah.
Actually owns the field.
I don't know the name of the landowner.
Was he, do you know, he would have claimed to the fines?
He had an agreement with Mr. Taylor for Mr. Taylor to recover the material, and then he could do what he wanted with it, yeah.
When you found the necklaces, did it still have the string?
No.
No,
we re-string them normally with fishing wire, and we normally string them as a hoop as well, just so that they don't fall off the ends.
So you have to pick them out one by one where they are.
Yeah, so normally when you're digging on site, sometimes it depends how complicated the assemblage is, but sometimes they're lifted as a block, and then they do a tabletop excavation of them. But yeah, each bead is recorded in its location and planned before it's lifted and bagged separately and numbered, so we know which one goes this way.
Somebody's got some patience then.
Yeah, you have to be with doing archaeology now. It's laborious, yeah. Questions?
Fine.
Was there any fabric?
There was actually lots and lots of bits of fabric attached to the back of the brooches, and also bits that were sort of under skulls that might have been part of pillows. But yeah, there's lots of fabric, and that was looked at by a specialist. So we've got the type of weave and things like that. There's probably a bit more work to do again with that. But yeah, the preservation of the fabric next to the metal was actually really good.
Is there any pottery?
Hardly any, which again is interesting. There was pottery, and some of the graves did have pots, but not a lot of pottery. You know, like the cremation cemeteries, everyone's putting inside a plate. Yeah. But you do get, there's some of the information very accompanied with pots. Yeah, it's all domestic pottery, not cremation pottery from the site though. Yeah, but we have got them though. Yeah.
You're saying about there's spaces in it with boats in one direction, in one direction, and then it ceased. Is that because the population centre have moved away, or have they moved to Christianity or something?
Yeah, it's that basically. The Anglo-Saxon cemeteries tend to stop, and they move because they become Christian, so they leave their pagan past behind, and you get new cemeteries near the churches. Yeah, that's basically what happened.
And the question
Gone.
are there any marking cemeteries? Or do they all kind of merge together?
As far to my knowledge, no Viking burials. No one who we can definitely say is a Viking has been excavated in North Lincolnshire.
Which is interesting when you do the place names, there's so many B's and Bobs.
Yeah.
All that.
I think what happens with the Vikings is because you get the Vikings are wearing their Viking stuff when they arrive, then. But the Anglo-Saxons, they kind of imprint their culture, whereas the Vikings, which are of course from very similar places, come over wearing their Viking stuff. They then become assimilated rather than assimilating the Romano Britons. like the Anglo-Saxons did, they become assimilated. So they start wearing what everyone else is wearing, and so they're difficult to identify in graves. So that's when you get the Anglo-Scandinavian materials. So you get Anglo-Saxon, you get Viking, Anglo-Scandinavian in the late Saxon period. So they kind of disappear archaeologically. We're not like York, where you've got really good evidence of settlement and in North East. So we've got the place names, like you say, and we've got Anglo-Saxon, and we've got Viking finds, but we haven't got anyone that we can say they were a Viking. Yes, but that, you see, that would still make it very difficult to identify them, because of course it's the same signature as the Anglo-Saxon, or very similar signature. So yeah, so it's good to get DNA pin, everyone's a Viking, but actually they're probably Anglo-Saxon.
Why would the cemetery fall out of use when it did? Is there any evidence of continuity of use from the Roman period, given the nearby site?
There isn't any Roman material in the graves, but there probably is some, some continuity with the Roman settlement, and the cemeteries, like a lot of early Anglo-Saxon cemeteries, they go out of use in the 7th century because of Christianity. So people move and set up churches, and they start being buried near churches, so they're not buried in these cemeteries anymore. They leave their pagan past. Okay.
Yeah, you're saying, like, we've got places which are Vikings come from, they've got assimilated, but in other places there are definite Viking populations. Was Lincolnshire more of just a temporary camp? There are places they were settlements and just.
You sat next to Savannah, probably. I mean, that's a lot of But the Vikings, Northern Lincolnshire is part of the Danelaw, so there was Viking settlement here. It's just like places like York, where they settled and became traders, and it became their centres. They're much more visible archaeologically, whereas here they would have been settling and becoming farmers, because a lot of Vikings weren't just after, rampaging around stealing everything. They were actually looking for places, new land to settle on as well. They were farmers, they were traders, they weren't just raiders.
Yeah.
So when they came here, they were into North Lincolnshire. The place names are telling us where they came and settled and started farming and were living with, with their families, whether it was a family that they brought with them, or because there's lots of evidence for women being with the Viking army, or whether it was they'd married a local person as well. But yeah. So again, we can't see their building styles when in Northern Lincolnshire, because they built like the Anglo-Saxons, where we do find Anglo-Saxon houses, because that's not common either, because settlements are underneath where we all live now. Well, thank you very much. I found that interesting.